Hello, everybody coming in. We're on time at 6:59. Now, this is a very prompt group of people we've got right now, which is good. So, oh, hi, everyone. Hi, Kareem.
Hi, Hans.
Lorna, you're in there somewhere. Yeah, definitely. Oh, Eileen, how are you doing? It's so Eileen, Shawn, she's been with us since day one. Day one, right? 14 years ago. And they're all say hi to Shawn. Can you see Shawn in the chat?
No, actually, I can just see the number of participants, and I see the odd little chat box that pops up.
Like
I see what you're responding to, but that's it.
I'm seeing everybody coming in.
Yep.
Lots of names. Yeah, I was just gonna say I see Josh here. Hi.
One of our favorite freedom fighters. You tell somebody to go and write a letter to an MP, and Josh is there within 5 minutes. He's great. Hey, Jordan. That's good. So it's 7:01.
Yeah, so we'll wait a couple of minutes before we get going.
Absolutely. But while everybody's coming in, we had 500 amazing registrants.
And I think that's all we can handle, right? Is 500?
Yes, that's true. That's the
all
capacity.
we can handle, yeah. Yeah. And yeah.
And we definitely
hi, Marilyn.
Not registered today. Yeah.
Yeah. So Shawn, we're doing 45 minutes, and then we're going to do Q&A afterwards.
Oh, you wanted me to talk? Okay, yeah. No, I'll do 45 minutes.
Okay, good. Hi, Lily.
1,000 Islands.
I mean, usually my problem is being short, so I'm happy to talk for as long as I can.
Excellent.
So before we turn it over to Shawn and let him start the discussion, we just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. It seems like everyone here is pretty familiar with Zoom, but we do have a Q&A function. So you're free to click that as Shawn is speaking, type your questions in, we'll be moderating there, and we'll be saving those for the end of the call. So he'll do his part for the first 45 minutes or so, and then we'll turn this into a conversation where we're able to invite you all in and discuss some of those questions that you put into the Q&A box.
Perfect. I do have to say, Shawn, Wendy Desault is in. She was the first one ever to cover her entire van in the Charter of Health Freedom decals. Do you remember that? That was amazing.
I don't remember that, but I remember Wendy.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you, Veronica. And we do have the info@nhppa.org email up now for subscribe to make it very simple, so that when we start our January bi-monthly conversations with Shawn and guests, we're able to send out information quite quickly about our membership. But of course, we'll be sending out the recording of this first. So it's 7:04. We'll have people popping in, but we can absolutely get started.
Okay, well, let's get started then, because
Okay.
I'm hoping to, if I'm only taking 45 minutes, it would be nice to have some time for good Q&A after. So I really appreciate that everyone is here. I'm viewing this as a joint experience as we kind of try and figure out exactly where we are and what we should be thinking of from a philosophical legal perspective, and hopefully helping each other figure out how to navigate this going forward. It was interesting as I was preparing for this, I noticed, oh, it's December 8th, 2021. And I don't recall if Canada declared war on Japan on December 7th or December 8th. I know it was before the US that for a short period of time we stood alone. But we were already at war with, obviously, Nazi Germany in December of 1941. And I thought that was somewhat thematic. It's interesting that, by that time, most of Western Europe was under the Nazis' control, and they were just doing things that today would be unbelievable. And I'm being a little facetious, but really unbelievable. Can you imagine that back in 1941 in December, in France or Germany or a bunch of other countries, you had to have identification papers. You had to have them when you went out. The police or the army could ask at any moment for your papers. And if you didn't have them, you'd be in a world of hurt. And they were creating subgroups. The most commonly known one, obviously, is the Jewish population, where they're segregated. And the media was just relentless so that everyone else would be okay with them being segregated. They were being taught basically to despise and hate so that nothing would be said with what they were being done. I mean, the Jews in Warsaw, it would have been about 2 months ago, would have gotten the notice that they had to relocate to a specific neighborhood that became known as the Warsaw Ghetto. Obviously, they had to have their papers and they didn't have rights. And what was incredible about Canada then, we haven't decided who we are yet today, but then we were outraged. We weren't facing identification papers in 1941. We weren't worried about Germany invading North America and imposing subgroups and restrictions and going after our Jewish population. But we were so outraged that we lined up to volunteer to go overseas and fight so that other people wouldn't be subjected to identification papers and subgroups and restrictions on their rights. It was absolutely crazy. And who would have thought then, on December 8th, 2021, that we would be here? I know if I backed up 3 years to December of 2018, I could not have imagined, you could not have convinced me that Canada would be the type of place that it is now. It's just absolutely crazy. So I want us to kind of discuss from a legal philosophical perspective why we need to change things and why we need to start thinking about this a little differently. And I'm hoping some of my thoughts are going to surprise you as we go on. There are many people on this call that are not familiar with me. So I'll share just a little bit of kind of my journey on how I became really concerned about health rights and people's rights to choose how they're going to treat their own bodies. I was called to the bar as a lawyer in British Columbia in February of 1995. I'm still a member of the British Columbia Law Society. And I started practicing trying to protect constitutional rights, primarily those in our charter. So I've done a lot of criminal defense work. I expect that I've run over 1,000 trials in my career. I've been in court lots, basically where the rubber meets the road on our rights issues. And I also, a large part of my practice was health law, trying to protect people's rights to make individual health decisions and to access things that they needed. So, but when I was called to the bar in February of '95, I would describe myself now as a law and order person. So, you know, I thought we had a social contract. I thought the government was there to help us, you know, not perfect, obviously there's problems. And I definitely bought into the mainstream media narrative on almost every issue. So I would watch the mainstream media news and absorb that. And it's not that I didn't have ability to critically think, but I didn't have an understanding that regardless of the source, including mainstream media, that I am being given a narrative and I should treat it as a narrative. So I would have been what Cliff High now describes as a normie, somebody that just basically accepts most of what the mainstream teaches us without much critical thought. One of the things that first kind of got me realizing that there was something wrong were actually the government crown attorneys in court. Because as I was trying to raise constitutional issues and get the courts to care about rights in specific cases, I was always, and I choose the term always purposely, I was always opposed by government lawyers arguing that we shouldn't have rights, arguing that our rights should be circumscribed. And that challenged me philosophically because every attorney general in Canada, federal or provincial, is charged with upholding the law. And that's what we want. We want our attorney generals who run our our Crown Prosecution Services and our Crown attorneys. We want them to uphold the law. We want them to love upholding the law. We want it to be a passion. Well, our supreme law is our Constitution. So our Constitution Act 1982, Section 52, it reads, the Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any law that's inconsistent with it is of no force and effect. And our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is in the same act, the Constitution Act of 1982. So I would expect that a focus of the government and the attorney generals and the lawyers underneath them would be to protect our rights and uphold our rights. But I cannot think of a single case that I was involved with where a government lawyer supported the rights. And they would oppose the rights and voraciously oppose the rights, and sometimes be opposing them in unethical ways. I mean, there would be days you'd have to go home from court or to the hotel after court and shower because you felt unclean from what was happening in the courtroom. And not just my cases, everyone's cases. And through my career, it has become harder and harder and harder to get constitutional relief. I mean, in some cases now, you actually have to argue for days in court, even to get the right to argue that, you know, your charter right. You can't even just argue it and prepare for it. You have to get through some gates first. And it's become so difficult and so expensive that for all intents and purposes, our charter rights are for the rich who find themselves in a good fact pattern. Those two things. So that's pretty tough. And then in the area of health, it was even a little harder, because the purpose of this lecture is not to talk about how our Food and Drug Act and drug laws work. And if you're interested, I'm sure there's other videos of me on the net about that. But suffice it to say that most of us think our food and drug laws and Health Canada, they're there to protect us and have good health outcomes. And it's simply not the case. So our food and drug law is set up to protect intellectual property rights. It's not obvious at first, but the effect of our law is that to treat any serious health condition, and right now it's just serious health conditions, you have to go through a process that really only chemical drugs with patent protection at the time can get through. I mean, the patent protection can end and the drug's still on the market, but anything natural or anything that doesn't have a patent just isn't there. And sometimes I've been surprised. I had one case in Calgary where several people died when Health Canada took a treatment away. And then the company's charged criminally. And because it's a criminal file, I'm able to get a whole bunch of disclosure. So I've got Health Canada's internal emails, and I've got, you know, correspondence from other people to them and back and forth, and I'm able to piece together what happened. And we had this situation where Health Canada was threatening to take a treatment away. And literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ordinary people wrote to Health Canada, called them, the whole thing, begging, saying, look, this is the condition I have. I've taken all your approved treatments. They haven't worked. And literally, I will die if you take this treatment away. And then there's correspondence from doctors saying the exact same thing. It's just now in the third person. My patients, I put them on all your approved drugs and they're not working for this person. This is working. Don't take it away. They'll die. And then Health Canada took the treatment away and a bunch of people died. And internally, they know this is happening, and you see zero compassion, you see zero care, because all they cared about was the law. And I actually was in that trial where I kind of got woken up that they're not there for our health. So there's this Health Canada inspector on the stand, and I'm cross-examining her. I'm trying to set her up for this point I want to go to. And so I have a bunch of, you know, preliminary questions. I'm expecting a yes to each one. And one of them was something to the effect, you know, well, Health Canada's there to protect our health. And she wouldn't agree. And she explained that no, Health Canada is there to enforce the law. And afterwards I thought of this, and it's like, she's right. So understand that this health agency, this Department of Health we call Health Canada, is part policeman, and they're there to enforce the law as it is, and the law is there to protect intellectual property rights. And to make things even more interesting is most of their salaries, so most of their budget is paid by the fees they charge the chemical pharmaceutical companies that have the intellectual property rights for their services. And in their internal correspondence, I will often see the pharmaceutical companies referred to as the client. So these are the people that have the ear of the government on this COVID crisis. But the point I was trying to make is just simply, I learned that the government really doesn't care, and Health Canada doesn't care about us as individuals, whether we live or die, whether we suffer, and definitely doesn't care about our right to make personal health decisions. And I'm passionate about each one of ours right to make personal health decisions. And the way I reason it out is, you're in a body. You're seeing this thing through your eyes. You're hearing my voice through your ears. You're feeling the pressure of the chair through, your nerve sensation. You're in a body. You have a total experience through the body. If you've got your hand on the table right now and somebody comes and breaks your hand bones with a sledgehammer, you can describe to the rest of us how you feel. You can describe, how you're going into shock and laying on the floor now, but we can't experience it. It's yours alone. And if it happens to me, it's mine alone. And I don't have the right to tell you what you do with your broken hand, or how you avoid broken hands in the future, or how you treat anything, because you're the one experiencing it. If you're the one that has to experience pain and suffering, you should be the one to decide what to do with it or how to prevent it. And I have a real problem with the idea that some bureaucrat can make life and death decisions for you or for me. And so just so you appreciate where I'm coming philosophically, that was kind of my journey. Now, tonight, I'm not wanting to take sides on COVID, because people have different opinions. People have different opinions on a whole part of this, and they have different opinions on vaccination. I actually think there's some bigger issues that we're all going to agree with, regardless of what side we're on, and that are more important for us to discuss, because we're only going to solve this together, and we're only going to solve the really important parts together. So let's start talking about some philosophical issues that we need to talk about. And one of the first ones is how actually should we, as a society, address a serious health crisis? I mean, we're facing us all. So let's imagine it's 10 years from now. And, it took us a couple more years to get through COVID, and we did, and all the restrictions ended, and, we struggled to get our economy back going, but, we have. And actually, things are kind of feeling like, let's say 2017, let's even take some distance away from 2019. But, things are feeling pretty back to normal. And then all of a sudden, Ebola escapes from the country of Congo, and it's really infectious, and it's spreading around the globe, and people are dying, and no Canadian is divided on whether or not this is a health crisis. We're facing it, and a lot of us are going to die. But the question now is, the philosophical question is, okay, we're facing a real crisis. How should we best face it to get the best health outcomes possible? Because one approach we could take is, well, why don't we have open debate? Let's all agree to be respectful, but why don't we allow people to talk about different treatments and different options and different approaches, and share different information? I mean, obviously there's going to be the fringe people out there, there always are, but what about an open and respectful debate? What about actually allowing different strategies? I mean, what if Toronto took one strategy and Montreal took another strategy? I mean, actually, wouldn't that be wise? We're facing a crisis where a whole bunch of us are going to die. one strategy might work better than others, and we might save lives if we learn that, but we can only know if we don't take a one-size-fits-all situation. Well, I mean, do you think that might lead to good health outcomes? There's another approach that we could take. We could actually say, no, we're going to have the government tell us what the narrative is, and the government tell us the only solution. We're going to narrow ourselves into a single thing. And in fact, it's so important that we follow that single course of action that we need to censor other opinions. And we actually need to make sure that other people don't listen to other opinions. So we'll have to create some very negative terms for people that don't agree with the government narrative or are taking other positions, so that we ridicule them. So, I mean, right now we have the term anti-vaxxer. Well, I hope you appreciate that that term is deliberately negative, so that people that are accepting the government narrative, and I'm not here to criticize the government narrative, I'm just talking about the best approaches for us to take. So if you keep hearing anti-vaxxer, and that's being ridiculed, you're actually being conditioned to close your mind. It doesn't hurt a person that has a different opinion than you, but it actually conditions you so that if somebody starts voicing an opinion that falls in with what you've told this, have been told this pejorative term relates to, that you actually will close your mind. You have to ask yourself, is that good for me to allow me to be manipulated to close my mind? So that's how we're choosing to face this current situation with COVID, is with censorship, with ridiculing different voices, and with really only having a one-size-fits-all. And I think we need to ask ourselves, and again, this has nothing to do with whether you agree or disagree with how we're dealing with it, but are we going to get the best health outcomes in any health crisis by basically censorship and stilling other voices and just having a specific narrative? I mean, I think most of us are totally surprised. I can't tell the difference between the mainstream media and the government. The message is exactly the same. There's hardly any deviation. So this is a philosophical issue that we need to get through, because for us to have the best outcomes here, we have to have respectful dialogue. We have to hear other opinions. We have to have an open mind, which means we even have to be aware of labels and how they affect how we approach people, and whether it closes our minds or not. We need to talk about what are the ramifications of taking away fundamental rights from those who aren't acting the way we want them to act, because that's happening right now. I mean, the government is saying the treatment approach we want you to take is you get vaccinated once, you get vaccinated twice. We know it's not long before you have to get vaccinated a third time. And if you do this, then we will grant you some privileges. But if you don't do this for whatever reason, and I mean, it could even be a reason that you know, those that are totally supporting this find reasonable, like, you know, I just want to wait a little longer and see how this plays out because it really is new. It's an experimental treatment. I just want more time. Well, those people, they don't have the same privileges. They are now second-class citizens. I'm not even talking about those that are adamantly opposed for other reasons. They're now second-class citizens. There's no denying it. It's like, you know, the Jewish people in World War II being removed privileges. They were second-class citizens. We now have two classes of citizens in Canada, which is quite astounding. But then philosophically, what are the ramifications of this? So my understanding is actually the majority of Canadians support this kind of loss of privileges for people that are not doing one and doing two and waiting then the 2 weeks so that they can get their identification papers. The majority of Canadians are supporting this. And I think they're not thinking this through. See, it's easy to support without thinking. It's easy to support, okay, you got to get one, You got to get 2, and then we'll give you some privileges when you think that's the right health decision, right? So let's say somebody thinks, no, this is actually, even if the government wasn't pushing this, no, I want to get 1 and I want to get 2, and this is what I want to do. It's pretty easy to support this, but think through the loss of privileges. So we already know we're getting at the point where you're going to need 3. Well, what if it keeps going and you need 4 and you need 5? Well, you know, what if at 4, you know, your child had a really bad time with the 4th one, and now the government's saying you're going to need 5 or your kid can't go to school? Like, I mean, you really don't have a choice here. How are you going to feel about it then? Like, is this one of those cases where first they came for the Jews and then they came for the gypsies, and the list goes on, and then finally they came for me? The principle that the government can choose what fundamental health decisions you make, that's what's happening right now. I mean, it's not law yet, it's not mandatory yet in Canada, but some other Western democracies are making it mandatory. It very well could happen here, and we all know, even though it's not law, that you must get vaccinated. I mean, the government's creating relentless pressure to do this. Don't tell me this is voluntary, when if you don't, you can't access services that you could before, when you're clearly a second-class citizen, and where many people are losing their jobs over this. I mean, this is compulsion. So we're in a situation where the government is dictating fundamental health decisions. Well, if we allow this, the government's going to continue doing this, and it may have nothing to do with COVID next time. It could be completely different. But what are you going to think when all of a sudden you're not agreeing with the government? Because do you understand what you're allowing? You're allowing the government. You're saying it's okay if you're supporting this and you're not resisting this. You're saying it's okay for the government to tell me and my children that they must take any treatment that the government says we should take. That's what's happening. And that, my friend, is slavery. You know, if you're a cow in the field, you've got the tag in your ear, the farmer decides what treatment you're going to get. If you're a slave, and we have slaves in 2021, we've got a lot of slavery in the world. And obviously in North America, you know, a history of slavery. Well, the slaves don't get to decide what treatments they get. The slave master decides. That's what slavery is. Slavery is control over somebody's body. You wouldn't think of giving me control over your health decisions. You wouldn't think of letting anyone else on this call have control over your health decisions or the health decisions for your kids. But you're allowing the government of Canada to dictate fundamental health decisions for you. That's slavery. And if we let that go, if we let that continue, and this again, it has nothing to do whether you agree with what the government's saying, but the government isn't saying this is what we think is best, please decide. The government's basically coercing us into this. You are submitting to slavery, and you have to take a step back, take a deep breath, maybe have a nip of scotch and go, okay, what does this mean going forward? I totally agree with this now, but what does this mean if I set this precedent? Because we're setting a precedent. This is not something that's ever happened in Canada before. This is a brave new world, except it's not as soft of a police state as Mr. Huxley spoke of. I think it's more towards Mr. Orwell's. You know, when I was preparing for this, it just came into my mind yesterday and I couldn't shake it. The show Logan's Run. I don't know if ever, the movie, not the series. And for those of you who never saw it, it's an old 70s sci-fi movie, and there's a city that's basically under this dome construction and it's sealed. You're not supposed to be able to get out of this city. And as a way of managing their resources, they would basically kill everyone at age 30. So it was a city of young people. And what they would do is they would implant a stone in your palm. And when you're young, it's green. Like everything's good. But as you got older, it turned red and then it would start flashing and you were supposed to turn yourself in and go through this, ritual killing with the belief that you were being renewed. And for those that didn't think getting killed at 30 was a good idea, they tried to escape the city and they were called runners. And that was the exciting part about the movie. And I just thought, well, how is that different than us giving the government the right to choose what health decisions we make? Because if we could say it, well, they can mandate that we have to do something. The government can also say we can't have something. We're giving them control. And if we're giving them control over fundamental health decisions, basically deciding what we can and can't do, do you think that that's going to lead to good health outcomes for you and your family? And it very well could lead, to early death for many people. I mean, I'm sorry, I work with these people, have for decades. I wouldn't trust Health Canada to be making health decisions for me. And if you do, that's great, but you have to have the right to make fundamental health decisions. And this is just going in a tremendously scary direction. When you get one of these health passports, and isn't that an Orwellian term? I mean, there's ID papers, I'm sorry. It lists, dates and treatments, and then has a QR code that's scanned and it pings to your provincial government computer and it pings back and says, yeah, this is valid. That person is allowed the privilege to eat at your restaurant or whatever it is. Have you thought about how dangerous it is for the government to be told what restaurants you're eating and when? And this isn't going to be provincial. I mean, it was in the news probably a good month ago that all the provinces, of course, all the provinces, we have no dissent on anything from any government. All the provinces and the federal government have agreed we're going to have a national database for our vaccine passports. And actually, some of the contracts, as I understand, were like pre-COVID for the infrastructure. If you think for a second that this is going to disappear after COVID, I've got some really nice oceanfront property in Saskatchewan. It's unusual because of the palm trees. So talk to me afterwards. I think you're absolutely crazy. We're going to a social credit system. And for those of you who don't know about the Chinese social credit system, is basically everyone has a score. So the government publishes they want their citizens to know, they publish, well, these behaviors are good. And if you do this list of behaviors, your score goes up. And these are bad. If you do these behaviors, your score goes down. So, you might be trying to get on the subway to go to work on Tuesday morning, and you're refused because on Monday evening, you posted something on social media that the government found offensive, and your social media score has gone below what you need to have the privilege of accessing the subway. And this is today in China, December 8, 2021, they're in a social credit system where they're being totally tracked and controlled by a police state. And that's what our QR codes on your passport is the precursor of. We're going into a police state. We're giving away those freedoms that we found were essential enough to fight and die for in the Second World War. Not having ID papers, not being segregated into different groups, not having privileges doled out for good behavior. So we published, and I said, well, I'll talk about, is this legal? Is it not legal? So, what about this needing ID papers and having the government dole out privileges? So we have restrictions for people that don't do what the government wants. And we've all been under house arrest, but thank goodness, 700 or 650 days ago, we were told it was only for 15 days to flatten the curve and off we go. I was only 2 weeks, so who cares? Restrictions on travel. If you don't have your ID papers, now you can't leave Canada, even if you're going to a country that's fine, and you can't come back. And when I say fine, the country doesn't care whether you do or don't. So is this legal? Well, the short answer is no, but I'll walk you through some of our fundamental rights and freedoms that are written on a piece of toilet paper we call the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that our government is using to clean their behind with. My favorite, Section 7. Pre-COVID, it was our strongest charter right. And Section 7 just reads that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. And so it's not when, you know, it's life, liberty, security of the person. The courts have interpreted as, you know, being able to make fundamental health decisions. And it's absolutely clear that that is being violated by these mandates. What about Section 2C of our charter, freedom of assembly? Well, we've all been locked down. And unless you have your ID papers, you can't assemble in large groups with other people, that whether they have their papers or not. We don't have freedom of assembly at all. Although if you have your papers, you can go into large crowds at abandon in some places. Oh, I have to read this one. Most of the ones I've memorized, but this one doesn't come up often for me. 6.1. Every citizen of Canada has the right to enter, remain in, and leave Canada. Who? You haven't got your ID papers. You're not coming to Canada. And you're not leaving Canada. I wonder how long it is until you can't leave your province, like even by car. Because you have to admit, it'd be somewhat exciting to have roadblocks at the provincial borders. It's something we can look forward to. How about Section 9? Everyone has the right not to be arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. But I mean, I guess it's not arbitrary if you don't have COVID and you've tested negative, but you know, you're not double vaxxed, so you still have to go to the camp. Pretty sure that's coming. And you know, Section 15, our equality, that everyone's equal before the law and equal benefit of the law. We've already had, you know, talk about perhaps health services being denied to those who, you know, are not willing to get their passports. So the short answer is, this is completely illegal. It's outrageous. We haven't even talked about the Nuremberg Code or the civil law. This is absolutely outrageous. Our supreme law of Canada is just being treated like toilet paper. Absolutely. And it's funny, like when it was first BC had announced, you know, by a specific date, we're going to be requiring these passports for government employees. And then it was within a week or two, Alberta came out with the same policy and, you know, a forward date. And my phone started ringing off the hook. I couldn't get anything done because a whole bunch of panicked people are just calling and calling. And you know, you got to talk to them and try and calm them down, you know. And it's basically the conversations I would have were, yeah, I mean, this is absolutely illegal. But, you know, you're not in a situation, I'll just exempt the naturopathic doctors. I think that they have an argument that they might be able to get an injunction. But for most people, no, you're not going to be able to get an injunction. So you're not going to be able to solve it before you're fired. And yeah, you can start a court case, and you know, if the law's followed years down the road, you're likely to get some financial compensation that this was illegal. But that's not going to help you now. And the reality is, you know, because you're trying to help people, is like, you do know this is just a tactic to force more people to get the jab. And they're just going to do other tactics than they have. Like, I mean, I just talked about the travel restriction where, you know, I'm sorry, it's December and next month's January. And I think pre-COVID, most of the country would be in Mexico. That's why the streets were deserted when it was cold. It's not that it was cold, it's just we were all down south. Well, we're not doing that anymore. It's just another tactic. It's just another tactic, and they will keep coming. And I was trying to get people to think differently. It's like, this isn't a legal problem because the government isn't acting legally. The government is acting aggressively. There's a war on your rights. There's a war on your freedom. I'm convinced that I'm not sure really what's going on. And, but the government is acting adversarially. The government is acting illegally. And I don't think the Queen's courts are going to solve this. I don't think they are. So, but some things are helpful, because learning the truth allows you to decide who you are going to be in relation to the new truth. Like, as if you believe, one thing, you're going to act as if that's true. But when your mind is changed, you change. And I thought we had rights in this country. I thought we had the rule of law. And I thought that, well, it's been a while. I was going to say, I thought, the government respected rights. No, I thought we've been in a soft police state for a long time and that there were two sets of laws. But I think it's clear now that the government's against our rights. I think we can all agree with that. And I think it's clear that the government is against open discourse on issues like COVID. And I think it's clear that we're in a police state. And so what do we do? How do we adjust to this? And, the first thing we need dialogue like we're having now. And we need to realize that we need to be stopped. We can't be divided. Who cares? Really, who cares how you feel on COVID? And who cares if you have a passport or you don't have a passport? I'm living in Alberta right now, and one thing that just really caught me was, one day we're all in shops without masks on. We're all together. There is no division between people that have, gotten the two and people that only have one or none. No division at all. And even this meme of, different, that wasn't there. And then bang, it's just like a switch goes off. We're back on masks. And then all of a sudden we have subgroups, and we're actually getting real hatred between the two groups so quickly. I'm just shocked. I'm shocked. Like, how can we be brothers and sisters on Monday and be in opposite groups that, are potentially going to harm each other on Friday? Like, and we're all wearing masks again, which makes us all afraid and nervous. Like, how the heck do we do this? So we've got to stop supporting this. And I'm speaking now more to people who have their passports, but I'm speaking to all of us, but our actions are allowing this. I've heard of some businesses that, the business owner just said when the passport requirement came in, I'm not doing this. I'm not like an SS Nazi soldier requiring papers from my clients and asking them to disclose health information that is actually illegal for me to ask for. And they got snitched on. They got snitched on. People phone the health departments, and then the health inspectors know who to target and fine and fine and fine. And if it's a restaurant, get the health guys in there. Like, you find some health violation, you look long enough, you'll find they're just harassed to either close down or relent. And let's say we have 100 businesses and 5 have stood up and the other 95 haven't. Well, those 5 get snitched on and the health authorities shut them down or force them to comply. And now we have full compliance. Why didn't we have 100% of the businesses say no? Because if they all said no, then the government has no power. The government only has power because we're giving them power by doing what they're telling us to do. We've already seen in 2 provinces, they had to back down on firing doctors and nurses because enough stood up. If it wasn't enough, it wouldn't have worked. But enough stood up. So if you have a passport, and I don't care where anyone stands on here, but if you go to that restaurant, you're telling the business it's okay that you caved, and now I'm caving, and please scan my QR code so the government database knows that I'm here as it starts to compile my social credit score for the future. If none of us went to restaurants who have passports, the restaurants would stop asking for passports. Do you understand that our actions here are making a difference? And it's hard. Same with wearing masks. If none of us would wear masks, it would collapse now. And I don't even care if you support masks. I don't care if you believe they make a huge difference. That doesn't matter whether you believe or don't believe. Surely there are very few people that believe it makes such a significant difference that the risk justifies us looking like muzzles. We're muzzled animals and scaring each other. It's an act of compliance. And you need to be aware that your actions are why this is working. Stop using media platforms that censor. Facebook, Twitter, the like. They censor. I find it funny when you have some expert that the mainstream media has been happy to quote for years, and all of a sudden they're actually just quoting a study that's come out in a peer-reviewed, blue chip journal, and they're just saying, no, it says this and this, but that could question the narrative, and all of a sudden they're censored of all people. It's just outrageous. Get off Facebook. Get your social network to move to some other platform. You are giving them the power to control the message by being there. Right now, it is almost 100% guaranteed your kids are going to be slaves, and that your grandkids won't even understand the idea, because the education system will teach them that it's a weird idea that you could make your own personal health decisions. That's actually terribly irresponsible, because we're all social creatures, and it's the greater social good that matters. They won't even understand that we would view that as slavery. And right now, you're almost 100% guaranteed to end there if you keep up with your behavior. We need civil disobedience. We need it. How can there be a social contract when the government is throwing away our fundamental rights and freedoms and acting criminally? We need disobedience. I want to read to you a quote from Frederick Douglass. And for those of you who don't know who Frederick Douglass is, he was a slave in the US, and eventually he got his freedom, and he became an author, and he wrote about his experiences, and he had much to say about power. What I'm going to read to you is true. This is fundamentally true. And so Frederick Douglass wrote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand." So the government will take from you and will give nothing back unless you demand it back. Our rights have been taken. They are not coming back unless you demand them back. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong that will be imposed on them. Find out exactly how far they can push us, and that's exactly how far they'll push us. They won't push us any less. They will push us until we refuse to be pushed anymore. And we've been pushed into being confined in our homes like criminals on house arrest. Many are being denied rights and privileges that others have, and we are being coerced into giving up our fundamental right to make our own health decisions and decisions for our kids. So what I think we need to do going forward, and I'll end soon. I'm obviously getting too excited. I should let the rest of you get involved, but I can't believe what's happened. And we're not separate. There aren't two camps. We are Canadians. We are brothers, and we are sisters. And if our children are we're not free. If our children are going to be free and our grandchildren are going to be free, it is only because you and I are going to demand of power that they be free and that you and I are willing to pay the price for their freedom. Ours was paid for long ago. We got it for free and we gave it away for free. The question is are we going to purchase it back for the next generation? So I'll let us now go into questions and answers, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Shawn. All right, so the first thing I wanted to say before we jump right into the question and answer, I was keeping an eye on the chat box while you were speaking there, Shawn, and everyone's having a great conversation. I noticed that there were several, I'm going to say at least half a dozen different freedom fighting groups of all sorts that were shared within the chat. And really, we love to see that. There are amazing groups who are coming together and doing awesome things to protect our rights and make sure that we maintain our freedoms as Canadians or global citizens. So absolutely plug into those other groups as well. We just want to say, make sure that you're also plugging into NHPPA and the things that we have coming forward into the new year. So if you are not on our mailing list already, make sure that you're joining there as well. But we absolutely encourage you to join some of those other groups as well. I think that's great that you folks are sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that it's funny because I don't even know how old the NHPPA is now, but we've been around for a long time. And there are times where we've just actually had almost no funding at all in a meaningful way. And so, for example, you see Veronica and Julia here, the amount of work they put together, even just technically, to make this work and let you know and keep me in line and all of that stuff. It's there and it's not free and we have an infrastructure and it needs to be supported. And so most of the time this falls on deaf ears when I ask people to help support us. But my word, that we could be doing so much more, and we'd like to be doing so much more, and we have something to contribute. We have a different aspect and a different perspective, and we give a lot of support. So I really implore you to help fund us, and the other groups. It can just be so frustrating when you're on a shoestring and having to volunteer obnoxious amount of times and stuff like that. So so please support us.
Definitely. And back to what Veronica was saying, on our website, www.nhppa.org, go to subscribe. And when we launch Shawn's conversations with Canadian thought leaders and all kinds of high profile guests that almost all of you have seen out there in the media, as well as your ordinary everyday heroes that Shawn, Veronica, and I, and Melody, who I think maybe you saw for a moment. There's Shawn is like Charlie's Angels.
Oh yeah, no, that's true.
That we're going to have, there's a lot of people, Shawn, that you've met through Veronica, myself, and Simon, I think Simon's on, and who you'll be interviewing or having these nice long form conversations with. Now, Nancy Majulian had mentioned something in the Q&A. And I know Nancy, she's a CNP from our college, IHN, and she had said, now they're tracking us, Shawn, he says, with our credit cards. So what's the difference between tracking with the credit cards and the sort of threatening QR code with respect to passports? And my first thought is, we are being tracked for algorithmic reasons for marketing, but we are not being divided into two types of citizens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and do you want me to comment? Because I mean, I think you have a good point, because what we don't know is does the government have free access to that database, or is there still some semblance of the rule of law where they have to get a warrant and have some good reason and convince a judge? I mean, I know in the criminal context, the police have to, do the warrant process. Who knows what goes on behind closed doors? But it is possible that one is a private database that is used for financial reasons, and obviously, they sell the data. But the other we know is a government database, and we know that the government's spending a lot of money. And I know the governments like to waste money, but they want this database. And the question really is why? I mean, aren't we supposed to get through this? Like, how long are we going to have health passports? I mean, that and the fact we build camps and are building camps, it's really funny out there.
It is, and it's concerning because of your quarter century in the courts. When you share with Veronica and I and the community on the call, that your trust in the system and processes have not been maintained over the course of your career.
See, but there's a good point here, and you see that's the fault of the people watching. So so for example, when courts make it harder and harder and harder to access charter rights, or I'll start with that, and then I'll switch to COVID. You have to understand, courts are part of our society, and my experience with most judges is they take their oath to adjudicate very seriously, and and it's just a tough job. I mean, they're doing their job, but they're part of our society, and so let's just use the criminal context. So you've had a high profile murder case. Well, the media is trying to sell advertising, so they're reporting on the case in a very sensational way and getting us upset and getting us so we literally want a conviction in most cases. I mean, and let's say the court upholds a charter right there. There was evidence illegally obtained that was just outrageous, and the test for the court is actually they do a balancing. Is society more harmed if I let the evidence in than if I let it out? Because if I let it in, I'm telling the police it's okay for them to be criminals, and it was shocking in this case. Or if I exclude it, potentially somebody who's guilty of a serious crime goes out. I mean, judges agonize over that. But let's say a judge excludes the evidence, or the trial just really did take too long and it was totally the state's fault, and so throws it out. What happens when you're reading your morning newspaper about the charge being thrown out because of our charter rights is that you're angry. Well, that person got off on a technicality. Who on the call goes, oh, thank goodness the court upheld our rights, because in the long term, I've got to have the Constitution and our rights privileged. And the problem is just the narrative. People fail to understand that the media is selling advertising when they're reporting on criminal cases. And I'm not meaning to say that it's all unbiased, but they really do want to get us emotionally grabbed so that we continue on with the story. And we just need more self-awareness of that. Well, understand with COVID, I mean, and again, not trying to take sides or judge, but I mean, most people out there are terrified. They're absolutely terrified. And if we have courts not upholding what the government's doing when it's very popular, that's part of them signaling our cues too. I just don't think that we can expect people living in our society to be separate from our society, even though they really do try. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. That's a job I don't want. It's very tough, but you have to understand how you react to things and how we react as a society. The courts are part of us, so they're human beings, and they can be scared too. I mean, and the risk if you get it wrong, I think that there's just going to be a conservative bias on anything to do with health, which makes it really hard to uphold health rights sometimes.
Karen Selleck is on the call, and she just in the chat, she had said that judge, and hi Karen, by the way,
yes,
judges
hello,
most, yeah, okay, and please respond. I'm just going to read her comment. She says the judges mostly seem to have bought the government line. Bad decisions in Manitoba and Ontario, especially that Justice Akabarali Akabarali, so she knows a name. She's racking up a long string of them, whatever that means. But basically, judges have bought into the government line.
Yeah, no, and I agree with her, and I share her disappointment, and I think I shared on the call. I mean, my advice to people has been that the Queen's Court, I don't expect, are going to protect us from the Queen, because it's the Queen that's attacking us through her government.
From your perspective, and from some of the comments that I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, Veronica, in the chat and the Q&A, is what kind of a pushback? I mean, we've always seen, as NHPPA or VCC, Vaccine Choice Canada, or any of the other freedom groups, we're always pushing back. Del Bigtree, Vandana Shiva's group, Dr. Shiv Chopra. How I wish that man was still alive here with us today.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts about actual physical actions?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and I'm not sure, because I think the problem is, and I would use the term spell. I don't mean hypnosis. I mean, it seems to me that a large number of Canadians literally appear to be under a spell where they're just so in fear and so accepting a narrative that they're really not understanding that. I mean, let's say COVID is super dangerous and, 10% of us are going to die. Well, would that number really change if we did things differently? And is this worth basically literally becoming slaves? Like the whole idea of so coercing people. And I mean, herd immunity, like, my gosh, the number of people that have complied, haven't we been long past this? Like, I don't think it's about that. There's something else going on. This isn't, yeah, this is hard. But I think until more people reach the point where they just say, I can't do this anymore, the rest of us are not going to be empowered to stand up, because there are people standing up. There are demonstrations. They're obviously not reported on, or reported very misleadingly and in negative terms. There are people doing things. There are people pushing back. But everyone has to understand they have to do their part, and understand that if they're not pushing back and they're taking certain actions, that they're supporting what's going on, regardless of whether they think the approach is appropriate or not. I mean, what I'm trying to say here on this call is there's deeper things happening, whether you support it or not. We're giving away fundamental rights, and we're going to regret them, and they're not coming back unless we demand them back and pay the cost to get them back. So I'm not sure how that looks like. I mean, we're in a war. I just hope it remains a soft war, and we can solve this just with civil disobedience and protests. Perfect.
That's what some of the community on the call had said too. Veronica, if you want to find maybe a couple of questions, but I wanted to mention that, what is her name? Where she said something interesting: propaganda, hypnosis, mass psychosis, like the witch trials, where yes, everybody was a witch, and it just became this truism that a woman with a black cat was a witch.
Can I share something?
Yeah,
So
sure.
I'm just this week, I'm reading a book called Pacific Crucible, and I was just, it's after the preface, it started with Pearl Harbor. And so here on December 7th, we have all these, this attack by Japan in the morning and during the day. And the people in Hawaii they're so afraid that they're just on edge. And so we have all these anti-aircraft batteries that now are being totally manned, and everyone's got a gun, and they're all on nerves. So this is the evening of December 7th, because the US carriers were out at sea doing maneuvers, and they're all out scouting for the Japanese fleet. Well, there were six planes that they decided, no, you're not returning the carrier, you're going to go and land in Hawaii. And so because everyone's on nerves, everyone's so jittery, the air traffic people are telling the anti-aircraft batteries, we have 6 American planes coming. And they told the planes, turn all your lights on, like clearly you're not doing a bombing run, you're making yourself come in slow. And so 5 got shot down because everyone was so jittery. And I think that's what we're at still, even though this has been years, because it's fear, don't think, fear, don't think, fear, don't think. We're still so jittery and on edge that we're not thinking. We're still, you know, we're still shooting down our own planes.
We have to treat those who have, Shawn, to your point, buckled to the fear or coercion or requirement because they're losing their jobs. We have to treat them with compassion.
Oh, yes.
There's no other way. There's no other way. And Michael Schmidt, raw milk farmer in Ontario, we have to treat people with compassion who have taken jabs to keep their jobs, taken jabs to visit their parents in nursing home, taken jabs to go to hockey games for their
personal
kids.
choice.
Yeah.
Some people, that's their personal health choice.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's our hope. We all need to respect each other's personal
Yes.
health choices. My message is we're not separate. We're all citizens. We're listen. I don't think anyone thinks it's a good thing that we're saying, like most people that support the restrictions and what's going on, they're not happy with this trajectory. Like we're all in this together. And I think we need to realize just there's bigger issues we just need to be thinking about that will pull us together, because we don't want to set these precedents regardless of whether we support those decisions or not. That's not the point. Do you support giving away your fundamental rights over your body and your children's body? That's the point. Does it, you know, so if you agree or disagree with the decisions the government's wanting to make, that's immaterial. It still has to be your decision, and this government coercion has to stop, and we have to stop buying into it. It's only has power as long as we give it power.
I'm looking at about 4 different questions on my screen right now that I'm going to try to lump together into one line of thought because they're fairly similar in their ideas. So the questions are relating to whether you're aware of any constitutional legal challenges that are underway, Shawn, or if you personally are going to be participating in that. There's also the caveat listed here that justice in the courts doesn't seem to be making any progress, and that dissent seems like an obvious approach, but it gets ignored and censored. So if you're able to speak a little bit more to that constitutionality, what we are looking at through the courts.
Yeah, I mean, there are several in several provinces. There are court cases working their way through the courts, and you know, some I'm pleased with the pleadings and some I'm not, but there's some people doing some really good work there on different issues, and I think we should support that as best we can, all of us. I'm viewing this as a war, though. This isn't just the government getting out of line. This is a coordinated and deliberate attack on our fundamental rights and freedoms, and a deliberate attempt to divide us as a society for some agenda I haven't figured out yet. But you know, we've just been dealing with this in a way that is so unnecessary. I mean, why I was using the example of, you know, let's say we have an Ebola scare in 10 years. Like, do any of us really think? I was asking rhetorically, you know, what would be the best approach? How can having a single narrative and ridiculing other opinions and one size fit all and overriding health rights, how can that truly lead to good health outcomes and the division? So at the end of the day, I mean, the odd court case might succeed, but is that years away? The injunctions have failed one after another after another. The only thing that seems to be working is when enough people in a group say no, that the government has to, or the employer has to relent. Like some employers have relented when enough employees have said, no, fire us. And they, oh, I'm going to go out of business. So the only thing that's worked so far is civil disobedience, you know, in a large enough amount. Like maybe we should be getting all the freedom groups together in the networks and just start having lists of businesses that are towing the government's line and saying we won't do business with them. I mean, I don't know. And then also maybe recharacterizing the issue, because what's the point of, you know, going to somebody who's just adamantly against, the treatment option the government is pushing and trying to convince them to have open mind, or conversely, you've just been immersed in this fear of the mainstream media for 2 years. Like, I'm not going to somebody is not going to convince you to change your mind, but we can all agree, wait a second, our fundamental right to make our own decisions is pretty important. And if we allow that to be given up without a fight, we're going to regret it. And it's just not going to end well. Like, we can be free to disagree, but not on fundamental rights. And people aren't really characterizing it that way and telling people, having them understand that actually their actions right now are making a difference. Like, it's funny, if I walk into a store and somebody ahead of me isn't wearing a mask, I don't put mine on for sure. I feel empowered. And if I'm the only one in a crowd that doesn't have a mask, I feel like I'm under a microscope and being scorned. Like, it's just one other person encourages me. And again, I'm not trying to make a pronouncement on masks. For me, it's a freedom issue.
Actually, you're the sorry, Melody.
Just want to
Melody,
make
the
a
voice.
comment on one of the things that you'd mentioned here is like for all the groups to kind of rally together and get a list of businesses that are not standing up. They're afraid to. I'm actually in a bunch of these Facebook groups on them, and they don't want their names published because they know they're going to be targeted then.
No, I mean the businesses that support the government, not the businesses that don't support the government, have a no-go list.
Well, and here's
no, we don't, and please don't snitch if you disagree.
Oh, no.
Like,
yeah, well, that's the thing.
Just don't.
You have to go and test each business on your own and see. So I've been testing here. I'm in Saskatchewan. Restaurants that, none of us are supposed to be allowed to go in restaurants unless you're double jabbed and everything else. And I have a vaccine control group ID card. I'm about to test that. I am hearing very good things about that. I talked to a guy last weekend. He's got his card. He's been to 10 different places between Saskatchewan and Manitoba because he travels for work. It's working everywhere. And
I would say you shouldn't, whether it's a real card or not a real card, you shouldn't use it.
It's a vax control group. I cannot be vaccinated. I am not.
I see. So it's some type of, but still,
yeah,
my point is if enough of us stop supporting businesses that are asking, they're asking for ID papers, just like a Nazi soldier by the Eiffel Tower on July 11th, 1941, the day after the French voted the Third Republic out of existence. I mean, what's the difference? That's my point is whether you got a valid exemption or, and I think in Alberta, you can go and get a rapid test and you're good for 3 days. You can access any service with that, but why would you? Because now you're buying in.
I think that's what I've always heard you say. There's that divide. There seems to be this gap between understanding, like fundamentally, there should be a fluid line that embodies everything without us attempting to.
So let me put it this way. Does anyone on this call think that, having QR codes scanned to access, we'll just use a restaurant because that's what we're talking about, that's going to end well for your kids?
Okay, say it again. So I want to.
Does anyone on this call, whether you have a valid card or not, a passport or not, does anyone on this call think that having that QR code scanned so you can access the restaurant is going to end well for your kids?
We've got, I don't know, 100 absolutely nots, no way coming in.
Yeah, so you see, it doesn't matter whether it's a valid passport or not. You're telling the business owner that them asking for ID papers is okay, and that just takes us deeper down the rabbit hole.
I want to circle back around, and we've got another question relating to the constitutionality of all the things that are going on in our world right now. Raul submitted it. He said a lot of us have kind of given up on these constitutional challenges after years and not seeing any results that way. He's saying some of his friends are studying how to file a private prosecution against the public servants who are acting illegally. And he's wondering if you have any such information about attempts like that that have been successful.
Not that it's been successful, but we do in Canada have the right, private citizens do have the right to go in front of the justice of the peace and lay a criminal charge. So the justice, will hear your allegations and determine whether or not it's appropriate to lay a charge. So everyone has that authority. I know in BC where I practice, if that happens, 100% of the time the Attorney General steps in to take over the prosecution and then determine whether or not to proceed with it. And I've never heard of them ever proceeding with one. So I think that'd be a dead end in BC, but I don't know what the practices are in other provinces, but everyone has the right to do that. And if you were going to do that, I think you'd want to try and coordinate to get as much attention as possible so that even if, it didn't succeed, that at least you're raising the issue and pointing the finger at people. So I think that's worth trying.
Elaine Nelson also commented on it. I didn't want to throw her under the bus there because what she's trying to do, like so many other people in this community on the call, they're trying to create some sort of survival mechanism that we also have to have compassion for. I think we just failed there a little bit. She is trying to do something to get into businesses, to do what she needs to do.
Okay.
And we were, wait, no, hold on, Shawn. But then we were all of a sudden, oh, that doesn't work. That's good. You're complying. It's a fundamental thing. I just don't feel good about the outcome of our conversation.
But just thing, and we were talking about restaurants. So for example, I'm expecting fairly shortly that, people that don't have the passport are going to be ordered to stay home. And, if that happens, I wouldn't see anything unethical of people, whether with valid passports or not valid passports, going and running errands and supporting it as much as they should. And one thing we might need to do as a community is figure out how do we support financially people that are losing their jobs or can't do this just because they want to uphold their right to make personal health decisions. Like somehow we've got to come together as a community here. So, there are different scenarios. So, we don't have a social, I'm not worried about people breaking the law. I'm encouraging people to break the law. I'm just saying, if you go to a restaurant with, and it's a valid passport or not, you're not doing that to help people. And that's supporting the system. So if we're talking about, helping people who can't access services or something like that because the unvaccinated are locked down, that's a different issue. And I feel differently about that. I'm just trying to figure out, and we're just having a dialogue. And you're all free to disagree with me. But I think somehow, like, people are doing it, businesses are doing it because they're trying to stay in business. But if enough of us made it clear we're not doing business with anyone that's supporting this, then that would fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we just have to figure out, well, what are we doing to support this? Like, how are we supporting this by our actions, and be very aware of the message our actions are sending. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, and NHPPA's past vice president, Mr. Ian Stewart, who I am so always.
Oh, is Ian on the call?
No, I'm just saying, I want to say something about him because he's brilliant. To Sophia Pastrilla's point, to Eldon Dahl's point, and other people I see here chattering, and sorry, Veronica, we'll definitely go back to the question, is he always said, you don't need a fully united front to move in the direction that you want to go. Remember that battles are made up of air, ground, sea, all different kinds of utilitied soldiers that aren't fighting in the same battle at the same time, but they're all moving towards a goal. So he said, never think that you're not doing good work if you're not fully united. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I know we're getting close to 8:30. There's a couple of questions here, Shawn, more towards natural health products. So I want to pivot a little bit to that before we move back and kind of wrap up the call with some ideas about what to do moving forward. So Eileen has asked, what happened to the third arm that was supposed to be added to the Food and Drug Act as per the formal recommendations from the Standing Committee's 2+ year process that was to be NHPs with experts in that field staffing the segment?
Yes, well, let's not forget that the Standing Committee of Health, and just so like callers understand what we're even talking about, is our food and drug laws were designed for chemical pharmaceutical drugs, not for natural products. And so for the longest time, there was no regulation. But then as they became more popular in the late 80s and 90s, Health Canada started attacking natural health products using the chemical drug regulations. So they basically come to a manufacturer or distributor saying, well, here's the law, here's what you have to do, but you actually couldn't do it because they were designed for chemical drugs. I mean, you couldn't get through stability testing or, pure, like you couldn't do it. So it was all a farce, and then people rebelled, and we had this huge citizen rebellion, and the government backed down. And Minister of Health Alan Rock at the time referred the matter to the Standing Committee of Health, and they went to town. I think it might still be the widest consultations of any standing committee in Canadian history, and came out with the famous 53 recommendations. And one of them is that you should not regulate natural health products as a drug. And Health Canada didn't like that, so they delayed for years and years and basically came out with chemical drug regulations that were just watered down. So what happened with that? Well, I mean, Health Canada happened to that. So yeah, but now the interesting thing is remember, tonight I was saying it's functionally illegal to treat serious health conditions with anything but a chemical pharmaceutical drug. Health Canada has come out with a new framework that they're going to be implementing, this self-care framework, where basically it's going to be functionally illegal to treat, even moderate or mild health conditions with anything but a chemical pharmaceutical drug. So Health Canada's delayed that. They're not following their published timeline, I think because of COVID, but they haven't abandoned it.
We do have I'll say a follow-up question that's based on that as well. Stefan has asked regarding Health Canada's plan to limit further information on natural health products, which is this self-care framework that you're discussing, Shawn, coming in 2022. He says he put it to a fundraiser for the NDP. His MP is Matthew Green of the NDP, that what Health Canada's suppression program, that Health Canada's suppression program is criminal in his view, and that there ought to be some criminal referral to the RCMP for investigation. And he's wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, that was a mouthful and several things to give thoughts on. So I don't know if it was, the suppression of information or not. But first of all, so all of our listeners understand what he means by suppression of information. So if you are going to sell anything for a therapeutic purpose in Canada, you have to apply to Health Canada for their permission in the form of a license. So if it's a chemical drug, it's going to be one licensing process. And if it's a natural product, it's a different licensing process, but it's very similar. And then you'll have this claim. So let me use True Hope as an example. Just because they've been in the public so much. So they have a product called Empower Plus, and they've gone through the licensing process. And I think all they're allowed to say is it supports mental health and well-being. Well, I don't know, there's probably 40 peer-reviewed published studies on their product, all funded by governments and universities, none funded by them, which, support a whole bunch of different uses, but it's actually illegal for them to share, peer-reviewed public research funded by governments. All they're allowed to say is supports mental health and well-being. There's 100% censorship on any information, let alone, peer-reviewed government-funded studies, if you're the manufacturer, distributor, or retailer. So it's absolutely crazy, because you think in the area of health, you would actually, and the Standing Committee of Health had recommended, no, have full disclosure. Because if, have full disclosure. So if you have very little research, say you have very little research, or, you're a herbalist and a herb is good for one thing and a different herb is good for another, but they both have kind of a secondary action. You think, that secondary action is the same. I wonder if I put them together, they might be for this third use. Well, just say that so the consumer's not fooled, right? So, but no, we have censorship instead.
Shawn, what is not censored are your birds that I can hear in the background now.
Well, and we moved them. I don't even know where they are. They might be upstairs. They're usually just right here, two budgies, and they know when the worst time to make a racket is, and they would have just been squawking earlier. So
They're charming. They're charming.
They are too cute. Well, we're saying that because it's 8:30. There's been a great chat going on.
There's
Veronica,
one more line that I'm hoping we can address before we wrap up. Is that okay?
Okay.
So Louise has a very pointed question, just how can we push back? And there's been a bunch of other folks who have contributed during this time that I've taken notes on. I saw Eldon Dahl, you had put up in the chat, not using the government's language is one way that we can do that. And Shawn, if you want to jump in, I know you have thoughts around the use of language. If you want to add anything here, you can. I had popped into my head when we were talking about pushback earlier, any of you folks who are in Ontario, when our premier came out and said he was going to close down parks for kids, and parents just freaked out. And within 24 hours, he was on TV in tears, apologizing for the mistake, and parks remained open. That's a perfect example of when enough of us stand up and speak out that something is wrong, that we don't agree with it, that change can happen quickly. So there is hope in this. Nancy had put up a question asking about flooding the court system with issues of charter rights. We have talked about going to courts. Everyone can take part in that if that's something that they want to do. Wayne, you're agreeing here with that no-go list. What are the businesses that we're not going to patronize? And then Kimberly, you're stating boycotting things. So, if there's travel requirements, maybe we boycott trains for a little while. So there's lots of discussion that's even happened just within the chat here with ideas of ways that we can push back in effective ways and be able to make a change that we would like to see.
Yeah, those are all good ideas. And I mean, the idea of tonight was just to really, we've had really good attendance, and it's also going out, like, I think we can only have reserved 500 max slots. And once we reserve a slot, we can't give it to somebody else. And we know that, you're lucky to get half the people that reserve, but they've reserved in part to get the recording of this, and we're hoping it'll go wide and far, as starting of a dialogue saying, well, let's come together, because who cares if we disagree on those things? We're not disagreeing that this isn't the type of country we want. We don't want a play state. We don't want this we want our kids to be making their own health decisions, just like we do. And we can respect each other, and we can disagree, and we can have different opinions, but we have to be able to talk, and we have to avoid censorship, and we can do this so much better. Like the amount of common ground is just crazy. And so I just view this as a beginning, and I really do think that the spell is slowly breaking.
So the last thing, Julia, maybe I'll throw to you on this one. Eileen popped into the Q&A earlier. What does Shawn and all of us at NHPPA have in store for future sessions? What's coming next?
Well, the conversations with Shawn is coming next. And I know that NHPPA as a watchdog is taking a look at the top of 2022, what's happening with the self-care framework.
And yeah, like we're trying to put things together. Like, so we're already talking with, a former journalist, I won't say at which organization, but you'll know, and about getting that person and another person on to kind of talk about how censorship and control of content in the media works, and other media issues, just so that people, are better equipped to, better analyze narratives and things like that. So we kind of, and also what's going to be important will also depend on how things are going on the ground. So we're probably starting this every 2 weeks, beginning in the beginning of or middle of January. And so you asked that question in, 3 weeks, and we'll be able to give you a much firmer list. So,
and because we can say, when it comes to the media, we can say it is the CBC.
There you go. I didn't know what I could say. So
you can, former journalists and producers at the CBC. But that'll be again part of our program. And Dean Parks, by the way, says hello, and he says,
"Oh, hello, Dean. Hello, Eldon. Hello,
Dean's
Karen.
brilliant.
There's so many
Dean
people that. Hello, Eileen.
Yeah. So, thank you. I think
just so everyone knows, I don't have view of the chat or participants or anything. So I'm just having to get cues from what's being said.
Right, and thank you for that. And I'm looking off to the side here because this is the only chat that I see here. And so thank you, Veronica, for helping to host. And Shawn, we're going to see you a little more often in the community that can. And Veronica, do you think we'll be able to have actual, I guess the chats, we're going to send out this replay, and we're going to see how folks like the chat or Q&A, and if they prefer to ask questions ahead of time or specific questions during these conversations that Shawn will have, these longer form conversations. But everyone has been extremely, Shawn, I know you can't see the chat, but it's a good chunk of conversation between people who are on the call. So it's really great.
Which is super, because then people are dialoguing their own ideas and getting things going. And
yes,
and that's so healthy.
It is. And they're sharing other amazing groups across the country too, which is great.
Can I just say, I think all of us have had through this, just some periods where, we really just get too down or, too scared or whatever. Like I said, I wasn't kidding at the beginning of this. My fiance and I just had to make a decision. We're not watching TV, and we felt better. Very recent, like, people are just coming across my path, left, right, and center, that think the same way I do. And, I also think, just from a practical note, that people should be prepared for supply disruptions. So make sure you have extra food and water, and whatever you think you might need, just if things just go south for a while, is a good idea. But I think from a mental health perspective, there are so many more people out there that think the way we think. You just don't see them. And I've just been really, really encouraged by a lot of people and things that are happening. So
this conversation is a perfect example of that. We have hundreds of people in the same space sharing ideas, and hopefully this is helping everyone feel a little less alone and a little more hopeful about the future.
Mm-hmm.
A little more hopeful. And I love that Shawn is ending the call with getting an emergency kit ready for the zombie apocalypse.
Well, no, it's just very, very
Good
practical.
advice.
And I mean, even the mainstream media is signaling that this is likely going to happen, right? And in the very least, you're going to have inflation, likely inflation. So, there's very little downside. So I just think that's being practical.
It totally is. Generator, firewood, medicine, all those sorts of things. No, it's true. It's true.
I would need another 2 or 3 hours to talk about everything I've been doing.
Well, we have someone sharing in the chat here that they would love to see a future session about preparing for those types of disruptions. So
interesting. You see, and that would be something that's non-divisive. Because like I say, we're thinking that it's healthier, and it's a contribution we can make, is to to pick things that are pulling us all together rather than apart. Because like I said earlier, I was just surprised. Literally on the Monday, we're all together and we're a big family, and by Friday, we're in groups and suspicious. Like, what? Like, and you know, that's just fear mongering by the media. And,
Totally.
and the
We're gonna
government the government deliberately creating divisions.
Right.
we'll have we're everybody's doing their what's necessary for this kit now that you've got us started, Shawn, but we'll have Brett Hawes on. Brett,
Oh, is he
Brett,
a
doesn't
hardcore
everybody-
prepper? It would be, I'd love
Oh,
to
yeah.
have Brett on.
Oh yeah.
Brett's
Yeah,
a hardcore.
I'm in a
prepper.
prepper group here too.
Oh, good. No, it's good. Everyone's
Well,
having fun with it.
well, that's great.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll close out and we'll wrap it up and we'll send this out to folks. Everybody
Well,
saying
yeah,
thank you.
and thanks everyone, especially the people in Ontario, because I know it's late, and the people in BC, it was early. So, you know, probably for Manitoba, it was just right. You know, hot porridge, cold porridge, and just right, so to speak. So, thanks everyone
I've
for
seen
coming.
a bunch of folks in the chat from New Brunswick. You've got some folks
Oh,
in the
wow.
Maritime here, so
Oh,
they
really?
really stayed up late for us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh.
I'm in Alberta, so it's not so bad.
Nova Scotia, Mary McDonald. Fantastic. Yeah, good. Yep, everyone's just saying thank you, Shawn, as they're going out. We'll have to get you savvy enough to see the chat next time.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It's if you guys even knew like how much grief I put the team through over this, even the promo video, because I had to do. I don't carry a cell phone, and I have trouble turning the computer on, and so you know, to expect me to do a video and download it was a little challenging. But anyway,
You did it.
well that
Here's
ends
the-
well.
We have to be honest, because every time you write a discussion paper, I remember Genevieve and now Veronica and I have to take out your space after the periods. And like that principle came, I think it went out of favor when the typewriter was put to rest, no?
Yep.
No, actually,
I don't think it was that long ago.
you know, and is the thing that hurts me about that is I don't know why after I type it with the typewriter, I have to put it into MS Word. So the whole thing is just confusing me.
So all those discussion papers you see out there, folks, done on a typewriter first.
Yeah.
So
Oh, man. Okay. Oh, Veronica's frozen again. So the first time she froze earlier, Shawn, she had asked a question. You started talking and she froze with her eyes closed. I thought, he does that to me too.
share with other people in your life. Melanie had that, sorry. Oh,
You're back.
did we
You're
lose
back.
connection? I'm back.
You're back.
Was I talking to myself there for a second?
Yeah, we heard you. You were frozen.
Okay. So Melody, I know you had popped it in before. Maybe you can do so again, just the link for people to subscribe, so they make sure they're on that list.
I've been dropping it in here a few times.
Yep.
So, leave it
All
on
your
the last
passions
one.
and concerns are mine, Shawn, says Leanne. Got phone numbers. We got thank you. Kimberly's laughing about the double spaces, which is fun. So everyone's just again thankful. What a wonderful turnout. Thank you, Veronica. And thanks, Mel. Thank you, Shawn. Thank you, Budgies. And Teresa, I know you're back there.
Co-producer.
She's the party whip.
All right.
Very
I'm gonna end us. This has been a
Okay,
wonderful
well,
call.
everyone have a good night and God bless.
Take
Okay,
care.
thank
We'll
you,
see everyone
everyone.
again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.